The 9-year-old boy stood completely still in the middle of a library that smelled like old money and polished wood, and he was shaking. Not from fear. From something far more dangerous than fear. From the kind of knowing that changes everything the moment it settles into your bones. His name was Kieran, and the girl standing 3 feet away from him, staring back with those wide, suspicious eyes, had his nose. His jawline. The exact same small crescent-shaped scar on the inside of her left wrist that he had spent his entire childhood believing was his alone. She was Korean. He was Nigerian-American. They had never met a single day in their lives. And yet, something ancient and unbreakable pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. Something neither of them had words for yet, but both of them could feel deep in the chest. The girl's name was Kyla, and she was already reaching for the emergency button on the wall. Kieran stepped forward. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a decade of unanswered questions. "You have the same scar on your left wrist as me." Kyla froze. Her hand hovered inches from that button. Her training told her to press it. Her father's voice lived in the back of her skull like a permanent command. Trust no one. Show nothing. Walk away. She had been taught to handle threats from the time she was 4 years old. She had sparred with grown men twice her size. She had never flinched. But she flinched now, because she had never seen her own face in someone else before. She pulled her sleeve down slowly, deliberately, like she was trying to make the scar disappear. Like if she covered it fast enough, this moment wouldn't be real. "Who are you?" she said. Her English was precise, careful, taut. "My father says I don't have a brother." And Kieran looked at her with eyes that had spent 9 years searching for something he couldn't name. And he said the 7 words that would set the next 72 hours on fire. "Your father is a liar. And so is my mother." Now, before this story goes any further, before you find out what is on that corrupted video file, before you find out who Jesse really is, and before you see what happens when the truth walks into a room full of the most dangerous people in Seoul, you need to understand something. This story starts in 2 different worlds. And both of those worlds were built on the same beautiful, catastrophic lie. Juk Kim was not a man you described with ordinary words. He was not simply powerful. He was the kind of powerful that makes governments nervous. He ran the Kim Syndicate from the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Seoul, where the lights never turned off and the silence always meant something was wrong. His empire moved in shadows, logistics, private security, intelligence brokering, the kind of business that never appears in newspapers until someone dies. He wore charcoal suits and spoke in measured sentences, and the men around him never sat until he sat first. He had 1 daughter. Kyla had been raised inside that world the way a jewel is raised inside a vault, protected, polished, and utterly alone. She woke at 5 in the morning for martial arts. She studied geopolitics before other children learned their multiplication tables. She could read a room's threat level in seconds. She could identify a lie by the way someone breathed. Her father had made her extraordinary on purpose. And she had never once questioned why he seemed to be building her for a war she couldn't see yet. She did not know what was in the locket that her father kept locked in his desk drawer. She did not know the name of the woman in the photograph inside it. She did not know that the woman had a son. 7,000 miles away, in a sun-filled apartment in Atlanta that smelled like jollof rice and JavaScript, Mary Ose was making breakfast and pretending she wasn't terrified. Mary was brilliant the way only people who have survived something devastating can be. She built security software for international NGOs. She lectured at conferences. She laughed easily and loudly and filled every room she entered with a warmth that made strangers feel like they'd known her for years. She had built a life so full of light that most people never looked for what she was hiding underneath it. She hid it well. The nightmares, she hid. The way she flinched at Korean accents in movies, she hid. The locked box at the back of her wardrobe, she never opened when Kieran was awake. Kieran was her entire world. He was curious and electric and slightly reckless in the way that boys are when they are too smart for their age and not quite wise enough yet. He could hack a school district's grading system before lunch and charm his way out of the consequences before dinner. He asked questions about everything. He asked questions about his father exactly once, and the look on his mother's face had taught him never to ask again. He had learned to find answers another way. So when Mary announced they were flying to Seoul for the Global Youth Leadership Summit, she had been invited as a cybersecurity keynote speaker. Kieran had packed his laptop, his portable router, and 11 questions he had been saving for the right moment. He had not planned to find her. He had been sitting in the summit's back corridor with his headphones on, running a passive scan on the building's Wi-Fi out of boredom and habit, when the security camera feed opened on his screen like a door swinging wide in the dark. He had nearly scrolled past it. The feed showed the summit library. Empty bookshelves. A reading table. A girl in a gray uniform standing at the window, completely still. And then she turned. And Kieran's blood stopped moving. He knew that face. He had never seen it before in his life, and he knew it completely. It was the shape of his own face, rearranged. It was the structure of the photographs he had found 3 years ago when he had quietly, carefully, broken into the encrypted folder his mother kept buried under 6 layers of misdirection on her personal drive. The folder that held one photograph, one legal document with half the names redacted, and a 37-second video clip that he had never been able to fully decrypt. He had printed the photograph. He carried it in the front pocket of his backpack. He was looking at her now in real life. He closed the laptop. He stood up, and he walked directly to the library. What he did not know, what neither of them knew, was that someone had been watching his scan the moment he ran it. Someone who worked in the syndicate's digital security division. Someone who immediately picked up a phone and called a woman named Jessie. And Jessie, calm, composed, lethal Jessie, had answered on the first ring. Because she always answered on the first ring. Right now, at this very second, you are exactly where the story needs you, standing at the edge of everything that is about to collapse. And if you want to see what is on that corrupted video file, if you want to know what Jessie did 10 years ago that was so catastrophic, she has spent a decade burying it. And if you want to be in that silent room when the truth finally tears through the walls, subscribe right now. Hit that like button. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss a single moment of this story. Because what happens in the next 4 minutes is going to make you forget to breathe. Jessie Park had a face made for trust. That was the thing about her that nobody ever understood until it was too late. She was not the kind of villain who announced herself. She did not sneer. She did not threaten. She had warm eyes and a quiet laugh and the kind of steady, reassuring presence that made powerful men feel safe, handing her things they should never have handed anyone. In 10 years of working inside the Kim Syndicate, she had never once raised her voice. She had never needed to. She was 34 years old. She had started as Jook's personal aide when she was 24, fresh out of a military intelligence program, sharp as a blade and twice as careful. She had watched, and she had learned, and she had made herself indispensable the way only the most dangerous people know how to, slowly, quietly, one trusted moment at a time. Jook had promoted her 4 times in 6 years. He called her his most reliable lieutenant. He had stood in front of a room full of hardened men and said, without hesitation, that Jessie Park had never betrayed the syndicate. He believed that completely. He was the only person in that building who still did. Because the people who worked beneath Jessie, the ones who had lived long enough to notice things, had learned that Jessie's warmth had a temperature. That it ran precisely as warm as she needed it to and no warmer. That when she smiled at you directly, something in your stomach tightened slightly without you knowing why. She was in her office on the 38th floor when the alert came through. A passive Wi-Fi scan, originating from a device registered to a 14-year-old's conference badge. Routine. The kind of thing her team flagged and dismissed 40 times a day during major events. Except, the scan had touched the edge of the syndicate's private cloud partition. Just the edge. Just a brush. Like a fingertip against a locked door, too light to open anything but enough to leave a mark. Jessie set down her tea. She looked at the device ID for a long moment. Then she pulled up the summit attendee manifest and searched the name attached to the badge. Kieran Osei. She read it again. Kieran Osei. The name sat on the screen, and Jessie sat very, very still, the way a person sits when something they buried 10 years ago suddenly shifts beneath the ground. She picked up her phone. She dialed a number. When the voice answered, she spoke quietly and clearly and with no emotion at all. Find the boy with badge number 4471. Don't touch him. Don't let him leave the building without my knowledge. And pull whatever he accessed in the last 20 minutes. She ended the call. She stood at the window and looked out over Seoul, and for just one moment, so brief that even she almost missed it, something moved across her face that was not warmth and was not calm. It looked almost like the beginning of panic. Back in the library, Kyla had not pressed the button. She was still staring at Kieran, and Kieran was staring back, and between them the air felt charged with something neither 9-year-old had been equipped to handle. Kyla had been trained for physical threats, for psychological manipulation, for social engineering attempts. Her father had prepared her for enemies who came in obvious shapes. He had never prepared her for this. "Show me," she said finally. Her voice was flat, controlled, but her left hand, the one with the scar, was pressed against her side like she was trying to hold something in. Kieran opened his backpack. He pulled out the printed photograph first and held it up without a word. Kyla looked at it, and something moved through her face so fast it was almost invisible. Almost. It was a photograph of a woman, a young woman, mid-20s, laughing at something off camera, caught in the kind of completely unguarded moment that photographs almost never catch. She was beautiful in an open, effortless way, and she was wearing a pale yellow dress, and around her neck was a thin chain with a small silver locket. Kyla had seen that locket before. She had seen it in a photograph inside her father's desk. A photograph he kept face down under a glass paperweight, in the locked drawer that he thought she did not know how to open. She had opened it exactly once, when she was 7. She had looked at the photograph for a long time. She had put everything back exactly as she found it, and never mentioned it to anyone. She had spent 2 years trying to forget the woman's face. She had not forgotten it. "Where did you get this?" Kyla's voice came out smaller than she intended. "It was in my mother's hidden folder," Kieran said. "Along with this." He opened the laptop. The file was there, already queued. 37 seconds of gray-green corrupted footage, stuttering and pixelated, shot from what looked like a ceiling-mounted security camera in a hallway. Most of it was unreadable, but in the final 8 seconds, before the file cut to static, 2 figures were visible. One was a woman in a dark coat moving quickly down the corridor. The other was a shape, a shadow, really, standing at an open office door. The timestamp in the corner read 10 years ago. The location tag read Kim Syndicate, floor 38. "I've been trying to decrypt the full file for 3 years, Kieran said quietly. "I can't get the audio. I can't get the faces clear. But I know what building that is now. I looked it up this morning when I found out we were coming here." Kyla was leaning over the screen. Her breathing had changed. "My father works on floor 38, she said. "I know." A long silence fell between them. Outside the library windows, Seoul moved and glittered and did not care at all about the 2 children who were quietly dismantling 10 years of lies in a room full of books. "I want to see the full file," Kyla said. "So do I." Kieran looked at her directly. "But I need access to the syndicate's internal server to pull the uncorrupted version. And I can't get that from out here." Kyla understood immediately. She had grown up inside the syndicate's world. She knew the building layouts, the server room schedules, the gala event that was happening tonight on the 42nd floor in honor of Jesse Park's 10-year anniversary with the organization. She knew which corridors the security detail rotated through and at what intervals. She also knew that what this boy was suggesting was the most dangerous thing she had ever considered in her 9 years of life. She straightened up. She closed the laptop herself and pushed it back toward him. "Tonight," she said, "there's a gala. Almost every senior member will be in the main hall. The tech booth will be running the AV system for the ceremony. I can get us in." Kieran stared at her. "You're not even going to think about it." Kyla picked up her bag. "I've been thinking about it for 2 years, she said, and walked out of the library. The gala was the kind of event that reminded you exactly what kind of power the Kim Syndicate quietly held. The 42nd floor had been transformed. Round tables draped in white linen and low candlelight. 200 guests, business figures, political aides, private contractors, a handful of faces that appeared in no public records anywhere. The city blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a second room full of light. At the center of it all stood Jesse Park, in a deep burgundy dress, receiving the quiet congratulations of people who feared her and called it respect. Juk Kim sat at the head table and watched the room with the particular stillness of a man who had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing he could do was let anyone know what he was thinking. He was 41 now. The years had sharpened him rather than softened him, carved away anything unnecessary until what remained was purely precise. He had built something extraordinary. He had paid for it in ways that never appeared on any ledger. He had a daughter upstairs in the residential suite, he believed, asleep. He had not checked. 2 floors above the gala, In the narrow technical booth that overlooked the main hall through a tinted glass panel, two 9-year-olds were doing something that would alter the rest of their lives. Kieran's fingers moved across the keyboard with the focused urgency of someone who understood that every second was borrowed. He was inside the syndicate's internal archive now. Kyla had known the maintenance override code, had known it because she had memorized every code in the building the way other children memorized nursery rhymes. The archive was vast and layered and aggressively encrypted, but Kieran had been studying the partial file for 3 years, and he knew exactly what signature to search for. He found it in 4 minutes. The full file was 47 minutes long. Not 37 seconds. 47 minutes. Someone had corrupted everything except those final seconds and pushed the fragment out through a back channel 10 years ago. Pushed it like a warning, or a confession, or a message aimed at someone specific that had never arrived. Kieran's jaw tightened. He started the download. He opened the playback simultaneously, jumping to a timestamp that the metadata flagged as significant. The footage was clear. Shockingly, devastatingly clear. It showed floor 38. A corridor. A woman moving quickly in a dark coat. And now, in the uncorrupted version, the face was visible. It was Mary. It was Kieran's mother, 10 years younger, walking fast toward the elevator with a small bag over her shoulder and something desperate in the set of her shoulders. She was leaving. And behind her, standing at the open door of what was clearly Jook's private office, was Jessie. Jessie who was not panicking. Jessie who was not distressed. Jessie who was standing with absolute calm, watching Mary leave, holding a phone to her ear, speaking quietly to someone on the other end. The footage had audio. Kieran turned up the volume with hands that had started to shake. Jessie's voice came through the speakers, low and precise and utterly without feeling. It's done. She's leaving now. She believes everything. Make sure the financial records are transferred to her name before morning. Jook needs to see them first thing. Yes. Both sides. She thinks he tried to have her killed. He'll think she sold the family files to the police. Neither of them will look for the other. Neither of them will look for me. A pause. The children will be separated by morning. That was always the condition. Kyla made a sound beside him that was not a word. It was something underneath words. Something that lived in the place before language, where grief is still just pure sensation and the body hasn't learned yet how to contain it. On the screen below them, through the tinted glass panel, Jessie Park raised a crystal glass and smiled at something Jook said, and the candlelight caught the glass and made it look like it was full of fire. Kieran's eyes moved to the AV control board. His hand moved to the input switch that connected the tech booth's display output to the main hall screens. He looked at Kyla. Kyla looked back at him. Neither of them needed to speak. Subscribe right now if you are not gone yet. Smash that like button and turn on your notification bell. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds in that hall is the moment this entire story has been building toward. The room is about to go completely, devastatingly silent. And you do not want to miss a single second of it. The screens behind the podium were supposed to show a decade of highlights. Syndicate milestones. Carefully curated photographs of Jessie looking loyal and indispensable and irreplaceable. A tribute video that had taken the media team 6 weeks to produce and Jessie herself 3 private viewings to approve. Instead, they showed the truth. The footage hit the main hall screens with no warning and no mercy. One moment the room was filled with the gentle sound of crystal glasses and murmured conversation and the soft self-congratulation of powerful people enjoying their own company. The next moment, every screen on the 42nd floor blazed with the sharp, unmistakable image of floor 38, 10 years ago, and Jessie Park's voice filled the room like smoke filling a sealed room. Quiet, then everywhere, then impossible to breathe through. It's done. She's leaving now. She believes everything. The room did not erupt. That was the thing that made it so devastating. It did not shout or scramble or break into chaos the way a lesser room might have. These were not ordinary people. They were people who had built entire lives on the discipline of not reacting visibly to things that destroyed them internally. So the room went silent. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of 200 people simultaneously stopping. Glasses held halfway to mouths, suspended. Conversations severed mid-syllable. Forks resting against plates with the delicate precision of things being set down very, very carefully so that hands would be free. Every single pair of eyes in that room moved to Jessie. Jessie, who had been mid-sentence when the screens changed. Jesse, whose mouth was still slightly open around a word that would never be finished. Jesse, who had spent 10 years constructing an architecture of calm so elaborate and so load-bearing that when the first crack appeared, the whole structure shifted at once. The crystal glass slipped from her fingers. It did not shatter loudly. It dropped and broke with a small, clean sound that somehow carried across the entire silent hall. A few shards skittered across the polished floor and came to rest against the leg of the nearest chair. Nobody looked at the glass. Nobody looked at anything except Jesse. And Juk Kim was already standing. He had risen from his chair the way tectonic plates move, without hurry, without noise, with the absolute unstoppable inevitability of something that has been building pressure for a very long time. His face was not angry. It was something far more controlled and far more frightening than anger. It was the face of a man whose entire understanding of the last 10 years of his life was restructuring itself in real time, and who was not going to allow that process to show until he chose to let it show. He was looking at the screen. He watched Jesse's recorded voice say the children will be separated by morning, and something moved through his eyes that the people nearest him would describe later, in whispered conversations, as the specific look a person gets when they realize they have been grieving the wrong thing for a decade. Then he looked up, not at Jesse, up, toward the tech booth, the tinted glass panel 2 floors above. And through that glass, visible only because they had leaned forward without realizing it, were 2 small faces. A boy and a girl, side by side, looking back down at him. Juk Kim had not seen his son in 9 years. He had not known he had a son for 9 years. The silence in the room deepened into something that no longer had a name. Jesse moved first. Because Jesse always moved first. It was the reflex that had kept her alive and untouchable for a decade. The instant recalculation, the pivot, the immediate offensive repositioning before the situation could solidify against her. She turned to the 2 guards nearest her and said one word. Up. The guards moved toward the exit. They were fast. They were trained. They had their hands on their earpieces and their eyes locked on the stairwell door before most of the room had fully processed what was happening. They made it 4 steps. Juk's personal guard, 3 men who had stood silently at the perimeter of the room all evening like furniture that breathed, stepped into their path without a single word of instruction. They simply materialized in the space between Jesse's guards and the door, and the message was physical and absolute and required no translation. Jesse turned back to face the room, and the room looked at her the way rooms look at things that have been exposed. There is a particular social death that happens in spaces like this. Not the loud, dramatic kind that plays well in movies, but the quiet, permanent kind, where the people around you simply reclassify you without ceremony, without announcement, and without any possibility of appeal. Jesse could see it happening in real time. She could see it in the way backs straightened and chairs shifted fractionally away. In the way eyes that had held warmth for her an hour ago now held something that was not hatred. Hatred would have been easier, but simply the flat, conclusive appraisal of people who had made their assessment and closed the file. She had spent 10 years building this room, and the room was done with her in 30 seconds. The door to the main hall opened, not the stairwell door. The main entrance at the back of the room, the wide double doors through which guests had arrived all evening. One of them opened now, just enough to admit a single person. Mariose stepped inside. She had been in the building because she was a keynote speaker at the summit hosted in the lower conference levels. She had been heading for the elevator when the security system flagged the breach on floor 42, and a syndicate staff member, young, panicked, acting on some instinct toward transparency that he would later be unable to fully explain, had told her that her son's conference badge had been tracked to the 42nd floor. She had come up the stairs. She was still in her conference clothes, a deep green blazer, her natural hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead from where she had been reviewing her notes 40 minutes ago, when the world had still been ordinary. She had not prepared for this room. She had not prepared for any of this. She was breathing harder than she wanted to be from the stairs and from the fear that had driven her up them, and she was scanning the room for her son when her eyes moved instinctively, helplessly, toward the man standing at the center of it. 10 years. 10 years, and she knew his posture immediately. The specific way he stood, weight slightly forward, chin level, the absolute refusal to be caught off balance that was so deeply his that it had always felt less like a habit and more like a second skeleton. Juk turned at the sound of the doors. He had not been told she was in Seoul. He had not been told she was in his building. He had not been told anything, because nobody had known there was anything to tell, because the whole point of what Jesse had done was that the two people who should have been talking to each other had spent 10 years in separate worlds, believing separate lies, each one convinced that the other had chosen destruction over love. They looked at each other across a room full of 200 people who had the collective wisdom to become invisible. Mary's hand came up slowly to her mouth. Not in shock. She was past shock. She had moved through shock somewhere on the stairwell. What was on her face now was something rawer and harder to name. The specific devastation of a person who has just understood, in full, the precise dimensions of what was stolen from them. Not just the years. Not just the ordinary accumulation of mornings and arguments and dinners and the slow building of a life. But the version of herself that those years would have made her. The version of him. The child they had both raised alone who should have known his father. The child sleeping in a corporate suite upstairs who had never known her mother's face except as a photograph kept face down in a locked drawer. The anger came after the grief, the way it always does. And it was not directed at him. They both turned to look at Jesse at the same moment. Kyla came down from the tech booth ahead of Kieran. She walked through the gala hall with her chin up and her shoulders straight, and the particular composure of a child who has been trained to enter rooms as though she belongs in them, which she did, which had never been more true than in this moment. The crowd parted. Nobody stopped her. Several people stepped back without quite understanding why, responding to something in the way she moved that bypassed social reasoning and went straight to instinct. She walked to the stage. She stepped up onto it. She stood at the podium where Jesse had been standing 20 minutes ago, and she looked out at the room, and she spoke clearly and without trembling, in the voice of someone who had been waiting to say this for longer than she had fully understood. You stole 10 years from us, Jesse. Her voice carried. The room was still so quiet that it carried easily, all the way to the back, all the way to the doors where her mother was standing with her hand still at her mouth. You stole my mother. You stole his father. You took two people who loved each other, and you made them into enemies so that you could take what was theirs. And you stood in this room tonight and let people honor you for it. She paused. She was 9 years old, and she was the most commanding presence in the room. We have the recordings. All 47 minutes. Every word. Jessie said nothing. There was nothing left in her toolkit for this. Every instrument she possessed required the other person to be uncertain, to be reachable, to have something left to lose or something left to fear. Kyla had already lost the thing Jessie had taken, and she had just gotten it back. There was nothing left to threaten. Kieran appeared at the edge of the stage. He did not go up. He stood at the bottom and looked across the room until he found his mother's face in the doorway. And then he looked at the man standing at the center of the room who was already looking at him with an expression that Kieran would spend the rest of his life trying to find the right word for. It was not a stranger's face. That was the thing. Even from across the room, even with 10 years of absence between them, it was not a stranger's face. It had the same bones, the same particular stillness, the same eyes that held everything in and gave very little back until they chose to. Kieran understood, looking at him, that he had not known he looked like his father until this moment. Juk Kim crossed the room. He did not hurry, but he did not stop. And when he reached the boy who was standing at the edge of the stage, he went down on one knee, right there in front of 200 people, and he looked at his son at eye level, and the composure that had held for everything else, for the footage, for the silence, for Jesse, cracked down the middle. He did not speak immediately. Neither did Kieran. They simply looked at each other, and the looking said everything that 10 years of silence had accumulated into, all at once, in the space of a few seconds. It was Mary who moved then. She walked through the room toward them both, and nobody in her path even considered not moving aside. She reached Juk and Kieran and stopped, and the three of them existed for a moment in a space that felt both private and witnessed, both unbearably fragile and completely unbreakable. Kyla came down from the stage. She walked to the edge of their circle and stopped. She looked at Mary, at this woman who was her mother, who had her cheekbones, who smelled like something soft and unfamiliar and deeply known, and her composure, which had held through everything, finally gave way. It gave way quietly, the way Kyla did everything, without announcement. Just her face shifting, and her eyes going bright, and Mary stepping forward, and pulling her in before she had finished deciding whether to allow it. The room watched. Even these people, with all their careful surfaces and their trained neutrality, watched. Because there are moments that exceed the social architecture built to contain them. Moments that are simply larger than the room they happen in. Jessie was escorted out by syndicate security before the gala formally ended. The details of what followed her departure were never discussed publicly. In the world Jessie had inhabited, accountability did not move through courts and press releases. It moved quietly, finally, and it did not leave room for appeals. She did not come back. 1 month later, the light in the Kim family's world had changed color. There were no more cold blues and corporate silences. The garden of the Kim estate was full of afternoon warmth, and the table under the tree had mismatched chairs pulled up to it, and the remnants of a meal that had gone on too long in the best possible way were still spread across it. Juk was laughing at something Mary had said, not the controlled, measured expression that passed for amusement in boardrooms. Actually laughing, surprised into it, his whole face open in a way that the people who knew him professionally would not have recognized. Mary was watching him laugh and trying to look unaffected, which she was failing at entirely. And on the bench at the far end of the garden, slightly apart from the adults in the way of children who were processing enormous things through the only medium available to them, Kieran and Kyla sat with a notebook open between them. At the top of the page, in Kieran's handwriting, were the words Operation, Get Mommy and Daddy Together. Below it, a single line item. Kyla drew a check mark through it with a decisive stroke of her pen. Kieran looked at the check mark. He looked at his sister. He looked back at the garden where his parents were sitting in the same afternoon light, in the same world, finally, after 10 years of being in worlds that someone else had designed to keep them apart. He closed the notebook. Took us long enough, he said. Kyla thought about it. 9 years, she said. Not bad for a first mission. And somewhere in the city, a gala hall stood empty. A crystal glass had long since been swept away. A podium waited for the next person with something true to say from it. Some people say blood is thicker than water. But in this family, the truth had turned out to be thicker than both. And it had only taken 2 9-year-olds, 1 corrupted video file, and 47 minutes to prove it. If this story moved you, if you felt every second of what those children carried, subscribe right now, turn on your notification bell, and smash that like button. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know, what was the moment that hit you hardest? And share this video with someone you love, because some stories deserve to be felt by more than one person. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.